This is the Capital Farm Credit Wednesday night podcast, our weekly look at the area athletic scene, what happened last week and what's going on this week. I'm here with my partner, Dan Youngblood, via Zoom. And Dan, going into this week, as of this recording, we've got 3 football teams still alive: the May Tigers, the Jim Ned Indians, and the Abilene Eagles. Now, the May Tigers played earlier today, but just before this podcast was released. So at the time of this recording, we don't know how that ball game turned out. But as of right now, we've got 3 still with a pulse.
Yeah, you mentioned May Tigers. You have the Jim Ned Indians, which had a big win over Mount Vernon in the state semifinals last week. And then the Abilene High Eagles, who had a big by-district win against El Paso Eastwood. That was their first playoff game and win since 2016. So congrats to them. We did lose the Cooper Cougars. We did lose the Wylie Bulldogs. We at the end of this week, we will have a maximum of 1 team. And we couldn't be done with football altogether, so we'll just kind of have to see how that goes. I do like Abilene High's matchup with North Crowley in the second round. I think that's a game they have the chance to win. But no games are easy at this point in the year. When you get to the playoffs, every game's tough, and that to me, that's a testament to what May and Jim Ned have done to make it all the way to a state championship game. That's a special season. So obviously, hats off to those guys, and yeah, it's been a fun ride following them.
Before we jump into this week's show, we need to thank our primary sponsor, Capital Farm Credit, with offices all over Texas, including Stamford and Abilene. Buy your own slice of Texas with Capital Farm Credit. Together, we're better. And Dan, before we jump into this week's ball games, let's take a look at what happened last week. First off, we had to say goodbye to Abilene Wylie and Abilene Cooper. Abilene Cooper, we had a discussion about this, and I felt that Mansfield Summit was going to give them a problem because Summit came from a really tough district. I still picked Cooper to win, but I think we both had a feeling that Summit was going to give them a go, and it did happen.
Yeah, I mean, they more than gave them a go. They whipped them pretty good, which I think surprised a lot of people statewide. I think most people thought Cooper was the favorite, despite what you just said, that Summit was a better team than their record would indicate. Watching them play, I have to really just ask how that team lost 4 games and finished 4th in their district to begin with. I mean, that team is just loaded with talent. Have a D1 player at defensive tackle who really dominated the game. They controlled the line of scrimmage. They shut down Noah Garcia in the run game. And then on the offensive side of the football, they were really balanced. They were able to run the ball. They were able to pass the ball to a receiver that's also a D1 athlete that's going, I believe, to Texas Tech, who had over 155 yards and 2 touchdown catches in the game. And then a junior quarterback who was just a dual threat guy that really had his way. And that was just kind of the story of this game, was that, Cooper got off to a rough start. Summit got up big, and after that it was pretty well over. And even when Cooper tried to get back into it, Summit always had the answer. I will give Cooper a lot of credit. They continued to fight to the final buzzer. They played hard the entire way. Were able to cut it to 21 in the 4th quarter, and had an opportunity to cut deeper into the lead. But the story of this game was just the way that Summit played, and they came out extremely fired up, and that's a really talented football team. So you got to give them credit, and obviously a tough way for this Cooper team to see its season end, but that happens in the playoffs. Anybody that makes the playoffs enough is going to experience that type of game at some point, and this was just that time for Cooper. One kind of interesting tidbit is both Noah Garcia and quarterback Aiden Thompson set school records in the win. Noah Garcia with all-purpose touchdowns. He finished his career with 73 all-purpose touchdowns, which is just a remarkable number, obviously. And then Aiden Thompson, the quarterback, became the Cooper's all-time leading passer for a career and also tied their all-time leading passing touchdowns record. So those 2 guys have had remarkable careers. It was tough to see it end in the first round this year, but talking with Coach Rome, he was just really proud of the way this team handled everything. That was a team that faced a lot of adversity around COVID. They had a lot of cancellations. They had guys miss games. They had a couple of weeks where basically their entire offensive line was out, and they overcame all of that. So he was just real proud of kind of the way they handled a very tough season, and he thinks obviously that will benefit those guys going forward, regardless of kind of what path they take. So a tough way to end, but a good season for the Cougs, and they just lost to a really good, underrated team, I think.
We also said goodbye to the Wylie Bulldogs, falling 34-24 to Grapevine, and a big night for a 1-2 punch from Grapevine. Dan, quarterback Max Cowgill threw for 282 yards and 2 scores, and Caleb Tejada, a running back, rushed for 190 yards on 29 carries. That's a tough 1-2 combination.
Yeah, and that was always kind of the matchup we were going to be looking at in that game was Wylie's defense, which had been really good all year long, against that Grapevine offense, which I mean the same story was true of that group. So Wylie coming into that game had held every one of its opponents under their season scoring average, and had played some good offenses. You look at Wichita Falls Rider, you look at Lubbock Cooper and Canyon Randall. These are teams with good offenses. I mean, offenses. Those teams that did a lot of nice things offensively throughout the season, and Wylie was able to kind of bottle them up throughout the year. But in this game, yeah, you mentioned it. Calgill and Tejada just kind of did what they do. It was a big game for the Grapevine offense, and that was the story of the game. But I think that you got to give Wylie credit. They hung in that game to the end. That was a one-score game into the fourth quarter, which is what Coach Martin wanted. He said, you know, when you can play into the fourth quarter, you've got a chance, and they did have a chance. So I think that's all you can ask. They had a lead briefly in the first half, right before halftime, give up a touchdown that puts them behind. But it was kind of nip and tuck the entire way through the first three quarters. They kind of gutted it out. They were getting beat on the stat sheet, but they were able to stay in the game with some big plays. And then in the fourth quarter, Grapevine just pulled away a little bit. But again, I think you got to give Wylie a lot of credit. That's a very nice season, a good bounce back season after a couple of tough ones. Getting into the playoffs was a big deal. And I think they did some really nice things. They're another team that missed some games due to COVID and had some weird situations crop up where in one case they missed almost a month of action just because of quarantines and those sorts of things. So I think this was a very positive first season for Coach Clay Martin. I think this is something they can definitely build on. And I think that you're going to start seeing that Wylie program kind of back where we expected them to be. And I think this was a season that proved that this team can compete in 5A. They're going to be fine. It just took a little bit of time for them to get their talent to rebound just a little bit. But I like the future of the Wylie Bulldogs. And I think that this season and even this playoff game was a good jumping off point for that program.
All right, the Abilene Eagles advanced with a by-district win over El Paso Eastwood in Class 6A, beating Eastwood 42-35 with more than 500 yards in total offense, Dan, and really turned Eastwood into a one-dimensional offense. Eastwood threw the ball 61 times, only rushed for 88 yards, and when you get into that mode, with that one-dimensional mode, especially against a tough competition, it's difficult to win.
Yeah, and that's kind of Eastwood's modus operandi anyway. They're more of an air-it-out passing team. But I think what Abilene High was able to do really well was to force them into that with turnovers. And they kind of did it with game situations to where they were able to build a 14-point lead at half. Even though they were giving up yards and giving up big plays, they were making plays on the defensive end to kind of give themselves an opportunity to build that lead, which they needed to do. And then at that point, really Eastwood had no chance but to become one-dimensional, like you said. But I think there are a lot of interesting things about this ball game. One of the big things was just kind of the dichotomy of the two halves for the Abilene High offense. You mentioned over 500 yards of offense. It was interesting because in the first half, they were all pass. In the first half, Abel Ramirez set a career high in passing in the first half alone. He had almost 300 yards passing in the first half. And in the second half, they go into that with a 28-14 lead and lean on the running game, where Fonzo Dotson, who was bottled up early, goes nuts in the second half. He finished with 176 yards, has a 91-yard touchdown. I think he finished with 3 touchdowns total. So it was kind of interesting that they leaned on the passing game to get them their lead early, and then once they had that lead, they were able to get the running game going, and that really protected it. And the other really interesting thing about this game was that Abilene High built a 42-14 lead in the second half of that football game. And it looked at that point like, hey, we're headed for a rout. Abilene High's got all the momentum. They're going to finish this game off really comfortably. And as it turned out, Eastwood did a great job of fighting their way back into it, get it within a 7-point game with a little over 2 minutes left. They have a chance, but Abilene High is able to milk the clock to finish it. So a great win for Coach Fullen and his team. That's another program. They have not been, like I said before, in the playoffs since 2016, have not won a playoff game since 2016. And this team that came into the playoffs with a lot of momentum and carried that through. They've now won 5 of their last 6 games, 4 in a row. And on the offensive end, they're playing really, really well. This is the most explosive an Abilene High offense has been probably since that 2016 team that was so good. So there are a lot of positive signs with what they're doing offensively. And the good news this week is they get to go play a North Crowley team that's more run-based. And the Abilene High defense has always really excelled against the run. So I think Abilene High has to be really excited with what they've done so far this year, and they've got more opportunities going forward.
And let's take a look at Class 3A D1. Jim Ned with a big 24-17 win over Mount Vernon in the state semifinals to reach the state championship game. And it was a game that was to Jim Ned's liking. Dan, we talked about tempo and how important it was going to be because we knew what Coach Art Briles was going to try to do with Mount Vernon, getting as many possessions as possible. But I'll tell you what, Jim Ned behind that big offensive line and Xavier Wishart in the backfield were able to control clock, control tempo, slow the game down to their liking, and to come away with a 24-17 win, really in a thriller. Jim Ned continues to astound me with the quality of their play and the style of their play. I'm so unaccustomed to seeing Jim Ned be this. A team full of hosses, man. They're hosses up front. They are big, they're physical and dominant up front. And really, there's not a team in the state at this level that they cannot beat. Their opponent in the Class 3A D1 championship will be Hallettsville, a team that they have already beaten this year. And that's no guarantee of them winning this one. No, there's literally no team in this classification that the Indians cannot beat.
No, absolutely not. You look at it, they've beaten the team that was ranked number one from wire to wire in the regular season in Brock. They've beaten Hallettsville, who will be their state championship game opponent. And they've beaten some really good teams to get to this point with Pilot Point, with Mount Vernon, obviously. But one thing you mentioned I think was a key and has been a key for them all season. You talked about the way they were able to kind of dictate the tempo of the game against Mount Vernon. I think that's probably the biggest strength of this team. They dictate their tempo against everybody. They did the same thing against Brock. They've done it to every team they've played, where they say you're going to play our game, and if you can beat us at it, great. But there aren't many teams that have yet. So I think you're right. This is just a team that knows its identity extremely well and is able to kind of dictate the way they want the game to be played each week. But like I said this last week, I said if Mount Vernon's going to beat them, they're going to have to do two things. They're going to have to find a way to get Jim Ned off the field when they're getting with these sustained drives, and they did that some, but Jim Ned still was able to score when they needed to. And then I said they're going to have to find a way to extend their own drives, which again, they did some, but they only finished with 17 points and had 2 turnovers to end the game. So Jim Ned –
Mount Vernon had 3 possessions in the first half.
Yeah.
And really it amounted to 2 because their third possession was, the final 12 seconds of the half. They really only had 2 meaningful possessions in that first half. They were completely taken off the field, which was huge.
Yeah.
It was absolutely huge.
Yeah, and one thing I got to watch some of the feed of that game, which was fun. But one of the things that I found kind of amusing was that for years and years, and Art Briles is an offensive genius, and what he's done throughout his career proves that. But for years and years, his offense has taken advantage of what the rules would allow as far as tempo and getting to the line and getting teams out of sync and kind of hitting them before they're ready for plays. And one thing I loved is with the new rules, the defenses have started to do the same thing, and you saw that some with Jim Ned, where anytime they would sub, Jim Ned would trot their guy in there, take their time, and by the time Mount Vernon wants to snap in the first 10, 15 seconds of the play clock, Jim Ned's having them snap in the last 5, 10 seconds because of the way they're subbing, which I thought was kind of poetic justice, just given what Art Briles has done so often with his offense over the years.
Man, who am I to question or second guess Art Briles? But I'm going to say it. They went for it on 4th and 10 in their own territory with about 4 minutes left in that ball game, and that eventually failed with an incompletion and gave Jim Ned possession in their territory. And I thought that was a key play in that ball game. Instead of punting it away, they went for it, and it really led to Jim Ned's what turned out to be the game-winning score. They rolled the dice, and sometimes it comes back to bite you. It bit them then.
Yeah. I was really surprised by that call as well. I think you punt and play defense there, particularly given the fact that Mount Vernon in the second half played some really good defense. They had really been able to control the line of scrimmage against Jim Ned a little bit, which not many teams have been able to do. But you mentioned that as being a key play. And I think maybe the biggest play in that game is one that people probably aren't going to talk about, and that was that punt out of their end zone to set up Mount Vernon's final drive, where if you shank that or give them a short field, all of a sudden they're going for the tying score on a short field. He booms it all the way to the 50, basically makes them drive from midfield with less than 2 minutes left. That was a huge underappreciated play in the game, I thought. And that's one thing we've talked about a lot, is just how good and sound Jim Ned's special teams are. And that's something that you don't think about, but those plays make a huge difference in the game. I thought that was one that made a massive difference.
And I'll tell you what, how big was that second to final possession for Mount Vernon? They have, first and goal, and they fumble the football. They get it stripped, and a fumble recovered by Jim Ned. Caden Martin with the recovery. That was humongous. That was their best chance to tie that football game up right then and there. Their final two possessions in turnovers.
Yeah, turnovers inside the Jim Ned 5. So that's a team we've talked about all year long. This is just a tough-minded, gritty football team. And I think those two plays showed that. It's particularly the one you're talking about, where they hit a short pass on a third or fourth down play to give them first and goal from inside the 5. Yes. And at that point, some defenses and you had a lot of time, and some defenses would break in that situation. Jim Ned makes a stop, forces a fumble, gets the ball back, and you're thinking, and they're back in business. So this is just a really, really good Jim Ned team with very few weaknesses, and they showed that again the final drive where it did start from about midfield, where Mount Vernon drives the ball and they're throwing basically to the end zone on the last play, and Jim Ned gets a pick at about the 2. So just a great win and one where they did have to face some tough situations and overcome a little bit of adversity. So this is a team that they have earned everything they've gotten this year. And I think you're right that there's not a team in that classification that's going to come onto the field and overwhelm them athletically or just from physically or any of those things. If you're going to beat them, you have to outplay them. And most of the times you have to outplay them at their own game because they're going to dictate their own tempo and they're going to get the game into the style that they want it to be played. You
have to get the football away from them, and good luck with that. And what a game for Xavier Wishart. 36 carries, 171 yards. Dude was a workhorse. I mean, he had 20 carries in the first half, and I was sitting there thinking, this kid is going to get 40 touches, 40 carries in one game. I want to see what's left of him. But what a workhorse and what a ball game. He was crucial in that game.
He was great. And then Tate Yardley does what he does. He's just so efficient and he's so smart. He's such a smart kid that they don't ask him to throw a ton, but when they do, he's very accurate and he runs that passing offense really well. He's not going to make mistakes. And I think that's what allows them to extend those drives is that they have a great running back who can get tough yardage. And then in the occasions where they do need to complete a pass, they've got a very good, efficient, accurate passing game. So, like I said before, not a lot of weaknesses.
What remind you of? What team does this sort of, when you start putting these little pieces together, in terms of style, it's very similar to that 2013 Cisco football team. Yeah. That could, with Mason Reed running the football, but at a very efficient, dangerous passing game backing him up, and of course, solid defense. It's really the same formula and good special teams.
Yeah, and this one's played probably more close games. They're kind of geared more toward playing tough, hard-fought games. But they're so good, and they execute so well, and they're so tough-minded that's a situation they want to be in. They have no problem whatsoever being in one-score games in the fourth quarter. That's something they've had a lot of success in. Basically, since that Ballinger game that they lost 20-14, they've thrived in that situation. They've won a lot of close games this year. And they seem to be very comfortable in that situation. And if it comes down to that again against Hallettsville, the first game was 24-21. I'd imagine this one will be very close as well. You got to like Jim Ned's chances based on what they've done this year against some really, really good teams in the fourth quarter.
Absolutely. Well, the Hallettsville game is going to be extremely tough, no doubt about it. But one thing, over the last 6-7 weeks, how many serious mistakes have we seen Jim Ned make? No. How many mistakes? Serious mistakes.
Yeah,
they really have not hurt themselves at all, and Wishart seldom fumbles.
Yeah,
Wishart seldom fumbles. They seldom give the football away, and they're not really hurting themselves that much with penalties.
Yeah, and that's the thing we talked about. That this is not a team that's going to beat themselves. They're not going to have big busts on defense that lead to big plays. They're going to make you work for what you get. They're not going to go and turn the ball over a bunch on offense. They're going to make you stop them, and which if you can do that, great. But they're not going to give you the ball. And then the big thing, and again, is probably the unsung factor of this team, is just how good they are on special teams, which, again, can be the difference in winning and losing games. And I think you can make the case that it was that the other day. Like I said, that punt, I thought, changed that situation. A high school kid punting out of his own end zone, that can be a disaster sometimes, really, and that's at all levels. It is not easy to punt out of your end zone. And he was able not only to get the punt off, to boom it 50 yards and make – Mount Vernon have to drive a pretty lengthy field. So those are the types of plays you don't necessarily think about, but those help you win football games. And that's something Jim Ned's done all year. They kick field goals well. They don't miss extra points. They punt well. They just do not have a whole lot of weaknesses. And it's been fun to watch because they're not a team that's gonna run away from you or that's gonna boat race you, but they're a team that's going to they're just going to grind you down, and at the end of the game, you're going to look and you're going to lose. It's just that simple. As you play, they're going to force you into a hard-fought physical game, and they're going to beat you at it. So it's just been really fun to watch.
That's the third straight week against very tough competitions that special teams proved crucial for Jim Ned. They got another field goal out of Hayden Humphreys as well. That's 3 straight.
Yeah, no, it's a great team. This is really needs to be said. Other than this is a great football team, and this now matches that Colt McCoy team we've been talking about his junior year in 2003 that made it to the state championship game and lost to San Augustine. This now is Jim Ned's opportunity to finish off their best season in school history if they can win this week. So this is a remarkable achievement, particularly when you look at that Jim Ned program. This is only the 4th time in Jim Ned school history that they've had double-digit wins. This is only their 2nd trip to the state championship game. They've only had 3 trips to the state semifinals. This is not a program that has been in this situation a lot, but I think that this is a team that is well equipped to handle it.
And with that, we're going to jump ahead to what's happening this week. We're going to take a look at this week's ball games. But before we do that, we want to thank some of our sponsors. Obviously, first and foremost, Capital Farm Credit, who brings you these Wednesday night podcasts free of charge throughout the school year. Also, for the love of the game, broadcasting, our old friend Terry Slavens, owner of Classic Country AM 1330 out of Graham, 94.7 FM KWKQ out of Graham, K-Lakes 93.5 FM out of Breckenridge, KATX 97.7 FM out of Eastland, KROO 1430 AM out of Breck, and KWBY 98.5 FM out of Ranger. That is for the love of the game, broadcasting. Also, Phil Hill of the Abilene Realtors Group, big supporter of local athletics. If you're in the market, give Phil a call at 325-669-5153 or visit his website at philhillproperties.com. Finally, Jack's Road Boring out of Snyder, dirt sales and services with experience and service you can count on. Larry Green is the man to call out there. Give him a shout at 325-575-8004. That is Jack's Road Boring in Snyder. And with that, we're going to take a look at this week's ball games. Now, we can't take a look at May and Sterling City, and the reason for that is we have recorded this already, and that ball game has taken place today before we recorded this show, May Sterling City. But let's hope for the best. Let's hope the Tigers are bringing home gold football.
Yeah, and you can obviously check out Brandon McAuliffe's game story and photos from that game. The Big Country Preps had a presence there. Unfortunately, it was our podcast this week was recorded before that game was played, but we were wishing May the best.
And with that, we're going to jump up to Class 6A, Division II, Abilene. After beating El Paso Eastwood last week, you're going to advance to the area round now, facing North Crowley. Abilene at 5-4 will be facing a North Crowley team that is 7-3, 7 p.m. Friday at Stephenville's Memorial Stadium. Dan, on paper, North Crowley looks like they're pretty stout defensively. They're only allowing 17 points per game. But I think one can take a look at their schedule and say, wait a second.
Yeah, I agree. I think, one thing that's kind of interesting is North Crowley's in a district that Abilene High was basically in before. You're talking about Euless, Trinity, Hurst Bell, Haltom City, Haltom. I mean, these are teams that Abilene High has been in a district with before, and North Crowley was beaten up pretty good by Trinity, which was the class of that league, and has been a very good program for a long time. But they also have a kind of an eye-popping loss on there to Hurst Bell, which won 2 games this year and has traditionally struggled. So I think this is a really, like I said before, kind of a favorable matchup for this Abilene High team. Once you get the air on, this is definitely a winnable matchup, kind of like I talked about last week against that Eastwood team. I said it's going to be a challenge, but this is not a game you look at and think that Abilene High can't win, particularly as well as they're playing. Obviously, there are going to be some big keys. If Abilene High wants to win this game, there are going to be some big keys to achieving that. And one of them is going to be, like you said, finding ways to move the ball and score against what has been a pretty good defense. The other one I think is going to be stopping this running game of North Crowley. They do have a 1,000-yard rusher in DeJuan Lacey, a kid who's done a really nice job for them. But again, like I've talked about in the past, that this run defense is the strength of this Abilene High defense. So I think that's going to be a challenge for North Crowley as well, to find a way to run against what has been a very good defense against the run. And North Crowley has not thrown the ball especially well this year. Quarterback Chandler Pullum has thrown for just over 1,000 yards and has a 9-8 touchdown to interception ratio. So I think if Abilene High can shut down the run, force them to pass, they're going to feel pretty good about their chances of kind of shutting down this offense. And then with the way the Abilene High offense has been playing lately, they're really doing some nice things. That, like I said, that's become an explosive offense. They've gotten to where they're running the ball really well and they're passing the ball very efficiently. So I like the way this Abilene High team is playing, and honestly, I like their chances to get by this North Carolina team. But like you mentioned, this is a good defense. They're going to have to find ways to move the chains against it. But you got to like the way Abilene High is playing right now. So this should be a good matchup.
All right, now let's move on to the big one for this week. Jim Ned at 13-1, squaring off with Hallettsville at 13-2 for the Class 3A D1 State Championship, 7 p.m. Thursday at Arlington's AT&T Stadium, otherwise known as the Death Star or Jerry World or whatever you want to call it. But it's the biggest stage in Texas, and this is going to be a rematch of a 24-21 win for Jim Ned that took place on October the 2nd, Dan, but you and I both know that does not mean anything.
No, that's one thing. I was talking to Delvan Cox, the former Abilene High football coach who's now working in athletic administration for Abilene ISD, and we were just talking about that, and he said now Jim Ned's got to do one of the toughest things there is to do as a coaching staff and in sports, and that's to go beat a good team a second time, and that will be a challenge. The one thing I like about Jim Ned, obviously, is that this is a team that really doesn't see the external stuff really doesn't seem to get to them much. I think they are kind of laser focused on what's ahead of them. That's been a strength of this team all year long. Yes. I think that'll be the case this way. They'll game plan for this one like it's the first time they've played them, and they're going to come out with their game plan and try to execute that game plan. And given what they've done to this point, I like their odds of doing that.
Well, I mean, you can look at Hallettsville and you can look at the skill personnel they have with the Brooks kid that's going to Texas and all that. But I'll tell you what, to me, what it's going to boil down to, the big key, other than mistakes, which Jim Ned typically does not make too many of, really is that push up front that they get with their offensive line and keeping the football away from you, pounding the football with Xavier Wishart all day long. And if they can do that and dictate tempo again and keep this explosive Hallettsville offense off the field, you know, if you only get 2 or 3 possessions a half, I don't care how explosive you are. I really don't. That's going to be the big key in that ball game. Limit mistakes and then be able to just force your will on the other guys. If Jim Ned can get that push-up run again with Wishart behind them, they're going to be awfully tough to beat again.
Yeah. No, and you mentioned the Jim Ned keys, and I view the Hallettsville keys as the same thing I said about Mount Vernon last week, is to beat this Jim Ned team, you've got to find a way to get them off the field, and you've got to find a way to extend drives. If you can't do those 2 things, you have no prayer of beating this Jim Ned team because they will just grind you down over the course of the game. So we'll see that Jim Ned was able to kind of, again, dictate their tempo and win that close, hard-fought game the first time they met. I'd imagine this one will be pretty similar in tempo. I think this will be another one of those games that's going to be really tight throughout. And I think it's just going to be the team that executes better. I think it's a team that's able to extend drives better and finish drives better. And Jim Ned's done a really good job of that. And then the one thing you mentioned this earlier that I like about Jim Ned that I think gives them a good chance in any game they play is, unlike a lot of teams at that level, they've got a reliable kicking game. So if they're finishing drives with field goals, those become important points. In fact, that was the game they won that first matchup on a field goal. So I mean, that was the difference. It was a field goal difference. So I like Jim Ned's chances. I like the way they're playing. Hallettsville is going to be a challenge. You mentioned Jonathan Brooks.
I believe they will be. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Jonathan Brooks is a D1 back, a highly rated back for a reason. He's going to be a load to stop. But I think that Jim Ned should have confidence. They've done it once. So we'll kind of see how it plays out.
Well, the things that have held true for Jim Ned up to this point have to continue to hold true. They can't beat themselves with mistakes, which up to this point they have not done. The special teams have to execute, which up to this point they have. If they get both of those factors and then that push up front, you know, Hallettsville's got to worry about that scenario. They got to force the football away from Jim Ned and get some quicker stops to win that football game. That from the Hallettsville perspective, they've got to do that. How do we get the football away from these guys?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think of, that is a potential concern is what you mentioned. This is their first time at Jerry World. This is going to be, I mean, you're going to have that. I mean, probably early you'll have some big eyes. Hopefully you can get there early enough to kind of get those things out of the way. But I think it probably helped them last week to play at Globe Life Park across the street, to where it's a big stadium. It's kind of got that big game feel. But if there's one thing about this Jim Ned team that they've proven is that again, they're able to block out that external stuff. If they can do that this week and just make it about playing football on the field, I think they've got a very good chance at winning this game as well, just because they've given me no reason not to think that. I mean, they've played so well all season long, executed so well, and been so tough-minded in these close games that I think those are all things that you want to see from a team going into this type of game.
The first time you look up, from the field at Jerry World and see your face on that big screen, how are you going to respond?
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to execute after that? I think Jim did well.
Yeah, I do too. And one thing I think will happen, I mean, Coach Fanning fortunately has a lot of resources in this area and in his coaching tree, I'm sure, coaching circle that have played in this game before. They can probably give him some tips as to how they handled that situation. I remember Coach Lucas last year from Hamlin talking about taking them out there early, letting them get all that stuff out of the way early, get your pictures, get your kind of the oohs and ahs out of the way. And when we come back, we're going to be playing football. I'd imagine they'll do some of that kind of stuff too. They'll try to kind of, get the stuff that might overwhelm a team, the external stuff, out of the way early, and when they kick off at 7, be down to football. So,
I think Jim Ned's style lends itself to that atmosphere. I think it's the teams that require a lot of ball exchanges, a lot of execution, throwing the football all over the place. Jim Ned's going to line up and try to pound you.
Yeah.
And they're going to have that adrenaline flowing. I think their style sort of lends itself to that big game atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, because Jim Ned's kind of that blunt instrument. They're not the precision. I mean, they're going to come in there and they're going to play physical, hard-nosed football. And
yes.
I think you're right that lends itself more to where, like you said, it doesn't require as many exchanges. There's not kind of the finesse, precision, that you need in that. So we'll see. I think that this team is well equipped mentally and from a leadership standpoint to handle this type of situation, but you never know till you get there. So we'll see. I think it'll be kind of important for Jim Ned to kind of get in there, get into their game, and do what they've done really throughout the playoffs and throughout the season. And like you said, where they kind of dictate that tempo and just kind of fall into what's become a really positive pattern for them, playing ball control football, extending drives, and keeping the other team off the field.
And with that, it's just about time to wrap up the Capital Farm Credit Wednesday night podcast. But before we do that, we want to remind you that we have 3 separate subscription packages here at Big Country Preps. We've got a monthly for $5 a month. We've got a semi-annual 6-month subscription where we knock that price down to $4 a month. And then we've got an annual 12-month subscription where we knock the price down to $3 a month. $36 for a full year of Big Country High School athletic coverage. Also, for you YouTubers who watch our videos via YouTube, please hit the subscribe button so then our videos are ready and queued up for you whenever you join up on YouTube. Most people watch via our website, and that's fine. But you YouTubers, please hit that subscribe button.
And we'd also like to remind you that if you see a photo you like in any one of our galleries, it is available for just $7. You can click that small shopping cart icon to the bottom right, follow that prompt, and purchase as many of those as you would like. But if you've scrolled around the site, you've noticed we are at a lot of events and we take a whole lot of photos. So make sure you check those out and check out our ever-growing Big Country Preps photo archive, which is full of photos all the way back to 2018. But like I said, we take a lot of photos. That's something we take a lot of pride in here at bigcountrypreps.com.
All Big Country, all high school, all the time. Welcome home.